Dear friends, the Czech Republic was the first country where I dealt with the issue of school segregation, way back in 2012, at the very beginning of my mandate. I found that segregation affected mainly two groups of children, Roma children and children with disabilities. More than 5 years later, and after visiting almost all the 47 member states of the Council of Europe, I realized that school segregation continues to affect entire groups of children all across Europe. These include Roma children, who are particularly at risk of being segregated in education, but not only them. Children with disabilities and children with a migrant background are also routinely separated from their peers. This is why I've repeatedly warned member states about the consequences of building and keeping separate education systems. Systems built to provide separate education to one group of children often end up segregating many more children on grounds of different alleged disadvantages. Segregated education is often the beginning of a life of exclusion and discrimination. The European Court of Human Rights judgment in DH and others against the Czech Republic was path-breaking. It was a first in a series of cases about school segregation of Roma children in various member states. For the first time, the court acknowledged that the disproportionate number of Roma children attending remedial, lower quality education was a result of indirect discrimination. The judgment paved the way for structural reforms of the Czech education system under the continuous supervision of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe. During my 2012 visit, 5 years after the judgment, my impression was that not much had changed as a result of that judgment. The education system continued to routinely channel Roma children into remedial education. Another 5 years later, in September of this year, I found out that the situation had clearly evolved for the better, as important changes had been introduced in the legislation, which set a solid basis for a more inclusive education system, in which Roma children can access mainstream education on an equal footing with others. Many obstacles had to be overcome, and it took a long time, almost 10 years, to start the inclusion process and to establish the right legal framework. I'm fully aware that there's still a lot of resistance to inclusion. I was struck to learn that a media campaign entitled "Stop Harmful Inclusion" was launched by those opposing inclusive education. Achieving inclusive education is not only a matter of law. There's a need for a mental shift in society to accept that all children have the right to access quality inclusive education, and that inclusion benefits all children, not only Roma and children with disabilities. I have hopes that the Czech Republic will continue to work to achieve full inclusion. It would be a shame if yet another generation of Roma children had to start their life in a segregated school. To conclude, I would like to stress that inclusive education is not a utopian project. It's an achievable goal. Other countries in Europe have managed to build and preserve over time inclusive education systems. I wish you all a very fruitful conference.